Lee Adams, and our guest today grew up in Bethel Park, graduate of Bethel Park High School, went on to Rollins College in Florida and graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in History. Then he went on to Duquesne University Law School. Worked for a law firm, Babson Cowen, served 3 years in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, and recently was elected to the Pennsylvania Senate of the 37th District, which includes much of the South Hills, the airport area, and the Sewickley area. Currently, he resides in Mount Lebanon with his wife and 3 kids. I'd like to welcome Senator Matt Smith. Senator, it's great to have you.
Great to be with you, Lee.
So you grew up in Bethel Park, and now you live in Mount Lebanon. What's the discernible differences about living in those two places?
Well, first, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity. And as you said, grew up in Bethel Park, now live in Mount Lebanon. And, I sort of look at it like there are many more similarities than differences. And I've seen it sort of from both ends. Growing up in Bethel, went to Bethel Park High School, graduated from Bethel in 1991, and then went to school in Florida, came back up here to go to law school. And when my wife and I were looking around, we really wanted to live in the South Hills. Growing up in the South Hills, it's sort of the old Pittsburgh story that if you grow up in the South Hills, you're sort of attached to the South Hills, and that's where you want to raise your family. So we were looking around, and we happened to find, a great house in Mount Lebanon. Recognized it's a wonderful school district to raise our kids, progressing forward, and that's really what brought us to Mount Lebanon. So, I see a lot of similarities. Great school system, great school districts, great communities. A lot of ties between Mount Lebanon and Bethel Park. It's funny, I know a lot of people I went to high school with at Bethel who now live in Mount Lebanon. I actually know a fair amount of people who I played basketball or baseball against who grew up in Mount Lebanon who now live in Bethel. So, there are a lot of ties that I think bind those two communities, and certainly, great rivals in the high school sports setting, as you know, and as I experienced playing baseball and basketball in Bethel, and having a lot of those rivals with my friends from Mount Lebanon.
So do you have more orange and black or blue and gold in your wardrobe?
I think at this point I probably have an equal number of both. It's interesting. I have a lot of great friends who are still involved with the Bethel Baseball Association, which I was a part of for most of my childhood, and Bethel Park Junior Football and all of those programs. So I support those efforts as much as possible. And then now representing in my state house district, as I did both Bethel Park and Mount Lebanon, I have a fair amount of Mount Lebanon football, Mount Lebanon baseball. So it's always nice whenever I go to one of the events to try and support the organizations and support the teams.
Well, as a senator, are you still allowed to root for Bethel Park?
I am allowed. Bethel Park is still my district, so I'm still allowed to root for Bethel. And certainly, growing up there, I have strong personal attachments to as I said, the BBA, the Bethel Baseball Association, to the football program. Our old high school doesn't exist anymore, as far as the campus setting. But it was a wonderful place to grow up. Great community. We lived very close to McMillan Elementary School, so I literally, walked across the trolley tracks in my backyard to go to elementary school for those years, and lived very close to Independence Middle School and the high school too. So, where we were located, everything was sort of right there for us. And growing up, I remember playing wiffle ball, every day for about 3 summers. We lived on Spartan Drive on a cul-de-sac, and remember playing wiffle ball every day for 3 years over the summers with my friend Chris Buzzy. And it was just a wonderful place to grow up, and it was one of those, as you know, one of those neighborhoods and communities where you could just go outside, when it was light, stay out until the sun went down, come in for dinner, and it really was a fantastic place to grow up. I loved it.
Yeah. Now, the new high school, I was just in the gymnasium, and that's something special.
It is. It's a lot different than our high school gymnasium, where we played.
And big difference.
Yes, and I was fortunate enough at Bethel to play on our Whippeal champion team in 1989 for Red Ryan. And then, had some really good teams in 90 and my senior year in 91 as well. And yeah, we had, one of the great things with the old gymnasium was it was really a tremendous home court advantage, because even though it was very small, the students and the fans were literally right on top of the floor. So I think it actually worked to our benefit in a number of games where we had a really excited and rowdy crowd there, particularly with the games against Upper St. Clair and Mount Lebanon and a lot of the local rivals.
So you go to school, you go away to school, you come back and do the law school thing, work as a lawyer. So now in politics for so many years, who has been your influences in your life as a person and as a legislator?
Yeah, I think just as a person growing up, I'd have to say my parents. I mean, they instilled in me, I think, the right discipline, work ethic, really committing yourself to a project or an idea or a goal. And I think a lot of that actually comes through sports. I think, as I said, playing baseball and basketball in high school and playing all three sports growing up, you are, I think, instilled with the traits that will make you successful later on in life, whether it's teamwork, recognizing how to work with others. I think one of the great things that athletics teaches young individuals is the right way to lose, if you will, and the idea that losing isn't it's not what you want to happen, but you have to learn from it, you have to accept it, you have to move forward. And in disappointment, I think, and loss is certainly part of life, whether you're in politics or business or any profession. You have to learn how to, I think, recognize the loss, why you lost, and certainly work the next time to improve from that. And it's certainly something that has helped me in government and politics, certainly with campaigns and recognizing what was the right thing to do, what was the wrong thing to do in a campaign, and improving upon that effort, I think, is something that athletics has really instilled in me.
Well, I agree, Matt. That's why I'm so heavily involved with youth sports. I feel like it gave me a lot growing up. It taught me a lot of great life lessons that I use to this day, and I want to give that back to the young people. And I think that's one of the nice things about the South Hills and all the areas that you represent, St. Clair, Bethel, Mount Lebanon, etc., is wonderful youth sports opportunities, and it's great families. And I think these kids are really not realizing how many great life lessons they're learning on top of these little games that they play.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point. It's almost like growing up, you don't recognize it as it's happening. And I think particularly with high school, I was fortunate enough, talking about mentors, I was fortunate enough to have wonderful high school athletic coaches. I had Red Ryan as my basketball coach in Bethel, for instance, and Red really taught us discipline. He was not what you would call, I think, a player's coach, but he was very disciplined. He taught us the right way to play. And I think he instilled in us a lot of those life lessons, as you said, teamwork, learning how to handle disappointment, learning how to win the right way with respect and dignity and sportsmanship. And that is something I think that is somewhat unique about what athletics, particularly youth athletics, teaches kids as they're going through the process.
No question. So what made you want to get into politics?
Yeah, I think that one of the big things early on was, in 2005, the pay raise happened. And, I'd always been involved in local government, involved in volunteering, involved in campaigning. And, I was very interested in it. And I think when that happened, that was one of the things that really led me to getting involved, or at least thinking about running for office and saying, I think I can do a better job out there. That's something that I don't think anyone agreed with, certainly from the public side. And that really led to me, at least initially, considering running for office. And then when I looked at it, I felt like I had things to offer, through practicing law, through growing up in the South Hills. Being able to add something to the debate was something I thought was very important.
So you get into politics, and You know, I'm assuming that you go in with some pretty idealistic thoughts about how you want to make a difference, you want to serve, then you get into the legislature and you see that, you know, it's not all that easy to get some things done. So what does that do to you? You know, you're now into what, you had 3 terms in the House and now starting in the Senate. What does that do to you from a challenge standpoint and seeing some of the dysfunction, so to speak? We talked a little bit about this before we came on the air. Where does that take you as someone that's been there and is experienced?
Yeah, I think you do experience some frustration. You think that things should happen a lot faster than they actually do. You know, one of the examples I always give is our effort, you know, right from the time I was elected, to downsize the legislature. And people have been talking about that for a long time, and it's something that I've really heavily pushed during my career. And I think, given what the public thinks about it, it's certainly something that should happen pretty easily. And you know, one of the disappointments over my first 2 terms in the legislature was not being able to put that policy forward and actually have a vote on it. We were fortunate enough during my 3rd term to actually have a vote on it in the State House, and it passed overwhelmingly. But yeah, that's a good example of something that I think the public agrees with. I think most legislators, if they had the opportunity to vote on it, as they did in the State House a few months ago, would vote for it. But you know, it does get a little frustrating sometimes when things like that should happen very quickly, but they don't, because of the inertia, because of the I think power that leadership has in the state legislature. I think disproportionate relative to other members. I think that's one of the problems you run into. But I still, you know, have a very idealistic view of I think politics, and the idea that this can be something that is a very noble profession and really should be. You know, the public entrusts a great deal of responsibility in elected officials, and I think, you know, that's one of the problems you've seen over the last few years, where there's abuses of taxpayer dollars, for instance, or where there's other issues that come up. I think what it does is it paints the entire government, if you will, with a broad brush, and I think that's very unfortunate, because, you know, I think one of the things that I've always tried to do is really go out into the communities and let people know, you know, where I stand on particular issues, as well as letting them know that I'm accessible, and you know, I want to hear from the public, whether it's at, you know, the Giant Eagle, or whether it's at a town hall meeting that we organize. I think it's important for us to hear directly from the public on all of these issues.
Now, you speak of the pay raise, and I do remember the big public uproar over that. You know, I think that the public is really concerned about the costs and how much does it cost. Now, if you can lower costs and keep the size of the legislature, I don't think the public cares that much. They want to just see the cost of their government be reduced. And do you think that that would follow with a reduction in the size of the legislature? Yeah,
I do. I think there are 2, you know, big things we can do initially. Number one, I think downsizing the legislature would save significant money. And really, I think there are 2 reasons to downsize the legislature. Number one is the cost difference. It would cost much less. You'd save about, you know, $20 million, I think, up front, and then ongoing you'd save about $5 million a year in operating costs. I also think the legislature would operate much more efficiently if it was a smaller legislative body. You'd have, I think, a greater ability to move legislation forward, to bring Republicans and Democrats together to actually progress things forward and solve problems. And I think that's one of the issues, as we were talking before coming on air, that one of the problems people see with both state government and federal government is the idea that Republicans are in one camp and Democrats are in the other camp, and no one talks to each other and no one talks about solving the problems, instead of just sort of scoring political points. And I think that's what frustrates people. So I think, you know, downsizing the legislature, you would be able to operate in, I think, a much more efficient manner. And that's one of the big differences I've seen, actually, from serving in the State House to now serving over the last couple months in the State Senate. where the State House, there's 203 members, in the State Senate there's only 50. And I think by having a smaller body in the State Senate, I've already seen that you can actually have engage in conversations with members of the other side of the aisle about solving problems rather than just scoring those cheap political points on a day in and day out basis.
So in the House, there's not a lot of discussion across the aisles?
Yeah, I think there's less, certainly, well, from what I've seen, than in the State Senate. And I think that's one of the real fundamental problems, that I think in the State House you tend to have more of the edges of the parties, more of the extreme ends of the parties, I think, driving the debate and getting the attention and putting out ideas that really don't go to solving the problems that we have here in the Commonwealth. And I think that on the State Senate side, you have I think much more of an ability to get those things to the front of the line rather than just dealing with sort of partisan politics. So I'm very hopeful over the next 4 years in the State Senate, we're going to confront a lot of the issues that we face here in Pennsylvania.
So hearing that, as I would think the public would think, well, you're not talking to each other very much in the House, so how do things get done, or do they just not get done?
Yeah, I think a little of both. I think when they get done, they tend to be one side driving the debate. And I think that's one of the issues. You sort of run into. I'll give you an example. In the State House, an idea emanated where they wanted to change the Electoral College distribution. And that was really sort of an extreme idea, really upsetting the balance, if you will, in the way that we select presidents. And that's one of those ideas that really, in my opinion, doesn't go to solving any problems that Pennsylvanians or residents of the South Hills face on a day in and day out basis. And I think that gets thrown out there, and what it does is, it crowds out other issues. It crowds out dealing with education investment. It crowds out dealing with solving some of these other problems. And that really, at the end of the day, is what happens frequently, I think, both in the State House and in Washington, D.C., where a lot of issues are talked about, but they really don't go to the heart of what people are concerned about: property taxes, education in the state, those issues that we really need to find solutions for.
Now, the other thing we talked about earlier was, in the House, you have 2-year terms. In the Senate, you have 4-year terms. So the hamster wheel of running every 2 years has to hurt your ability to bring good legislation and for the people, I would think.
Yeah, I think what it does is it sort of leads to what I would call paralysis of everyone's afraid to not rock the boat. Downsizing the legislature is a good example. I mean, that's sort of an issue that would really change the dynamic in a lot of ways. And I think those issues are not brought to the forefront frequently because of the 2-year term and the fact that there is basically a year where folks are out there and then they're back on the campaign trail again. And that's one of the reasons, I think, as we were talking about earlier, that I think the State Senate allows for a really engaged dialogue, a really engaged debate. It's one of the differences. I talked to both while he was in office and then afterwards, Senator Pippy, my predecessor in this position. He was also a State House member who moved over to the State Senate, and that was one of the things that he brought to my attention as a possible difference between the House and the Senate. That the Senate, you really are able to look at issues. You're really able to develop relationships among members from the other side of the aisle to try and tackle some of these problems. And as we were talking about earlier, I think one of the things that people are frustrated by is that I think the general public recognizes that when Republicans and Democrats get together and produce something as a consensus-based policy or a compromise, I think people recognize that whether they're Democrats or Republicans, they're not going to like 100% of what's in that policy. But I think what frequently happens is elected officials don't give the public enough credit. That the public recognizes we're not going to like 100% of what's in there, but we're probably going to like 75% if it's a compromise, and that moves the ball forward on a lot of these issues. And I think that one of the things that is a problem in D.C. and in Harrisburg is that that polarization, I think, exists, and also leads to that paralysis I talked about, where the ball isn't moved forward, and the public, I think, justifiably so, becomes very frustrated with that inertia and that paralysis in getting things done.
Do you think that some of the good government ideas, and in doing some research, I know that you've been involved in some government reform, and I've always been a big advocate of that. I think that you have your polarization extremes, but I think the majority of Americans in the middle would like to see good government reform, and I understand that you did some work in that area outside of just reducing the size of the legislature. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, back when I was elected, as I mentioned, coming in after the pay raise, our freshman class in the State House, which was very sizable, about 52 new members came in after the pay raise, almost an equal number of members from both parties. We all got together and said, look, the pay raise happened, that's in the past, but how do we move forward with a more open legislature? And there were a couple ideas that we proposed that eventually became part of the House rules and became law, one of which was a change in the state's open records law. Prior to 2007, Pennsylvania had sort of the ignominious distinction of being in the bottom 5 in terms of public access to documents. It was very difficult for the public to go in and get any public documents, whether it was a planning commission document at a local borough or municipality, or whether it was a meeting minutes from a state government committee meeting. So we got together and passed legislation. Actually, one of our local representatives, John Marr, was very involved in this as well, in putting together a much more robust open records law that would allow the public greater access. And what it did was, the big part of it was it flipped the presumption of the burden of proof on its head. So under the old law, for instance, if you were a citizen going in and wanted a document from your local municipality, the burden was on the citizen to prove that they were entitled to that document. What we did was we changed that from the burden being on the citizen to what the law is now. The burden is on the municipality to prove that there's some extenuating circumstance why that document has to be private, whether it's medical records or Social Security information, something like that. But it's a very rare case that they would be able to deny that citizen access to that document. So, it was a huge change in the way that the public can obtain information in Pennsylvania, and that was really the big change that we made. And then, as far as this statutory law goes, and then what we also did was we changed a lot of the internal rules in the House, and John Marr was also a leader on this issue, from eliminating debate after 11 p.m. at night. So, for instance, as everyone knows, the pay raise happened at 2:30 a.m. in the morning. What we did was we went in and said, the legislature cannot take any action, debate, vote, whatever it might be, after 11 p.m. at night. So if something's going on before that, it literally, 11 p.m. comes, it cuts off debate right there, right on the spot. We also allowed for what's called a 24-hour waiting period for amendments for legislation to be passed, because one of the problems we saw is the way that the State House used to work was you would have a bill on banking or insurance or something like that. And what they frequently did was it was called gut and replace. So they would gut that particular bill and amend it on the spot with maybe an agriculture bill. So you'd put the agriculture bill into the language of the banking bill. So the banking bill then became an agriculture bill. But the problem was that the members really didn't know that the change had been made, or weren't given much notice that the change had been made. So that would happen, and then 10 minutes later, they would have to vote on that agriculture bill. So what we realized was there were two problems with that. Number one, the members who were voting on it really didn't have extensive information about what the new bill was. And two, I think maybe even more importantly, the public didn't know what was in that bill, and they didn't know that the bill had been changed. The public didn't have a chance to make comments or submit comments for the record. And so what we did was we changed that. So now when that happens, there has to be a 24-hour window between the point that the amendment is made and then the vote actually occurs, so that members have a chance to look at it, so that the public has notice that it's in there. And that was really a significant change in the way that the legislature had operated, for 50 or 60 years prior to that point. And I think a huge step forward in sort of the internal workings of the State House.
So the freshman class of yours made some impact.
Yeah, there was a lot of impact, and I think the one key thing is we did it in a bipartisan way. And as some folks will remember, back in 2007, what happened when my freshman class was elected was that the Democrats ended up taking back the State House by a one-person margin, 102 members for the Democrats, 101 members for the Republicans. So it was a very closely divided State House. And what the freshman class did was we got together and thought, what way could we really, I think, put our stamp on bipartisan reform? And we elected, the Democrats and the Republicans actually elected a Republican Speaker of the House for my first term in the State House. We had a Republican Speaker of the House who basically ran the State House. I mean, that's what the Speaker does. So it was an interesting dynamic, and I think one that led to a lot of the reform measures that we were able to institute. The Speaker's name was Denny O'Brien, and Denny actually instituted a commission called the Speaker's Commission on Legislative Reform that produced a lot of the reform measures that I mentioned a little bit earlier. And I think one of the reasons that we were able to do that was because we had folks from both sides of the aisle working together on those significant issues. And I think without both sides working together, if it had just been one side or the other, I don't think it would have been as strong or robust as the laws and the rules we were able to change.
So you made some accomplishments with that freshman class of yours. What's out there that you'd like to do? What would you like to do with government reform? You're saying that the reduction in the size passed the House. Is it in the Senate now?
Yeah, the way that it works, and that really to me is the mother of all reform measures, because of what the public thinks about it, because of sort of the momentous, I think, change that it would entail. And you're right. Right now, it passed the State House last session. So it passed in May. Unfortunately, we sent it over. I enthusiastically supported it, as did both sides of the aisle in the State House. We sent it over to the State House. Unfortunately, we sent it over to the State Senate. Unfortunately, the State Senate sat on it, didn't take any action on it, and that was actually one of the big reasons I wanted to run for the State Senate, was to try and bring some of this common sense reform over to the State Senate. Unfortunately, the State Senate didn't take any action on it, so at the end of the session, it just died. So we're basically back at square one, starting to push it through both chambers again. I'm a co-sponsor of the bill to downsize the legislature in the State Senate. There are other members from the State House who continue to work on the issue. So I'm very hopeful. We've got another 2-year period in which to actually get this bill done. I'm hopeful that wherever it starts from, whether it's the State Senate or the State House, that once it's passed over to the other chamber will take swift action on it. Because, again, I think it's one of those things that, when you talk to people, and when the State House did a lot of town hall meetings, did a lot of door knocking, both on the campaign side as well as the legislative side. And when you talk to people, the public is overwhelmingly in favor of downsizing the legislature. So, I think it's important from a substantive standpoint because of the cost and efficiency reasons I talked about earlier. But it's also important from a symbolic standpoint as well, that I think the public, when there's overwhelming support for an idea like that, the public wants the legislature to take action on it. And that's one of the, again, I think one of the frustrating things from the public when you go out and talk to folks, that they don't understand why this particular policy idea just can't swiftly happen, and then we can move on to other things.
So you think about why doesn't it happen, and you kind of think, well, maybe the perks and maybe the privileges of being a legislator in the state of Pennsylvania and all that come with that, the benefits that come with that, outweigh the fact that you're going to have somebody voting against possibly eliminating their own job. So that's got to be the fundamental challenge or hurdle there.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge, but I think the bigger one is really, as I mentioned, once it's put up for a vote, as it was in the State House, it passed overwhelmingly, I think 150 to 50 or something like that. I think the bigger challenge is getting leadership on board with it, and that's leadership from both sides of the aisle. I don't think it's something that is necessarily a partisan issue as it relates to leadership. I think we need to get leadership because leadership in the state legislature controls a lot of the agenda and what's put up for a vote. So I think that one of the key things we've got to work on moving forward now in the new session is getting leadership early on to put it up for a vote. Because once I think it's put up for a vote, as happened in the State House a few months ago, I think it would pass overwhelmingly. But it's a matter of getting the leadership of both parties to put it on the agenda, get it run. And I was in the State House actually very hard. And one of the big changes and one of the reasons why it was able to come out of the State House was because we finally got the Speaker of the House, who's a Republican now, Speaker of the House, Sam Smith, on board with the idea of downsizing the legislature. It was actually Sam Smith's bill to downsize the legislature that we voted on in the State House. So that was a real breakthrough. I'm hopeful now that I've moved over to the State Senate, I could start to work on the Senate Republican leaders to put this bill at least out for a vote. And I think that's what the public wants us to do.
So that someone's in their home watching this interview, and they're civic-minded, and they have some energy, and they'd like to help in some way. So what can you say to that person that's sitting there saying, boy, I would really like to see that happen? Is there an organization I can get involved to help get that message to the leadership, or what can I do?
Yeah, the League of Women Voters has been at the forefront of the issue of downsizing the legislature. So that in terms of a local community group, the League is right there at the forefront. So I would strongly encourage anyone who's interested in the issue to contact anyone with the League of Women Voters, whether it's Allegheny, Washington County, any other area where the League is active. They've been tremendous. And then I think the other thing from sort of a governmental standpoint is reaching out to, as I said, the Senate Republican leadership. I can certainly provide that contact information, or folks can look it up online. And I think that's, I think one of the things that is very effective is for legislators to hear from the public, even if those individuals are not constituents, not technically constituents of that particular legislator, because I think it does raise someone's antenna when they start to hear about an issue from a concentrated number of individuals, even if those individuals are not directly constituents of that senator or that representative. I think it's a great way to try and build grassroots support, and as I said, we can certainly provide the contact information for those individuals, because I do think it is important for them to hear from the public.
So you're saying emails, letters, phone calls can be a good thing?
I really think that it is. I mean, I think that particularly when it's a concerned citizen who sits down at their computer to send an email, or sits down to type or write a letter, or sits down to make a phone call, I think those things are very impactful. And I, is my constituents from my State House district will certainly, I think, confirm. I mean, I think it's important, from my perspective, to reach out to those individuals directly, whether it's a letter back with sort of additional information, whether it's a phone call back with additional information or questions, whether it's a local town hall meeting. I think those things are so vital, and those communications between the public and legislators, I think, is really what makes a democracy and a republic very special in many ways.
You go out and you do a lot of events, you see a lot of people, you talk to people. I'm curious, it just strikes me that you're here for noble reasons. You're here to try to really help reform the government and do the best job you can. But I'm sure you run into people that take shots at you. So how do you handle that just personally? Because you know you have your good intentions, yet, I mean, you're voting to reduce the size of legislature, which I think the majority of Pennsylvanians, as you said, overwhelmingly support. So you're out there, you're doing what you do, and someone comes in and takes a shot at you. How do you handle that personally? Well, is it hard not to be defensive and take that personally?
Yeah, I think that the big thing you have to do is you recognize early on that everyone has their perspective. And I think, again, that's what makes our, country very special, is that everyone is permitted and not just permitted, but encouraged, I think, to express their views, whether it's in a public square or whether it's to their legislator or their congressman, whoever it might be. And so I think that's the first recognition you need to have, that when people take the time to either call us or email me or write a letter or stop me at the football game or the grocery store to express a viewpoint, that whether it's a supporter who says, keep doing what you're doing, or whether it's someone who says, I disagree with that you did this or that, or why do you think this? I think you've got to respect everyone's views and certainly take them to heart. And what I try to do is, engage that individual in a respectful and courteous dialogue about, why I might have voted this way or about why I've taken this position. And what I find is that when you certainly are open to hearing their viewpoint, even if you disagree with it or even if they disagree with me, I think that people appreciate that, and they appreciate the accessibility of being able to express their views to one of their elected officials, in a very personal setting, whether it's face-to-face or whether it's on the phone. And I think that process really helps, I think, both the elected official and the individual to understand a little bit better why someone disagrees with their position. So I've always found those encounters, to be actually very constructive and helpful. I frequently, learn something new about an issue that maybe that individual, they could be, for instance, an accountant who may have a special expertise about Pennsylvania tax law, and they may disagree with something I did, or they may agree with something I did, and they may have a little bit of a different perspective or a little bit different and maybe more extensive knowledge base if that's their area of business. So I'm always interested in hearing from constituents, both who support me and also who disagree with me on particular issues, because I think it makes me a better legislator and a better elected official to not only hear from the folks who are your supporters. I mean, that's always great and always very encouraging, but it probably wouldn't be the most constructive thing if all an elected official did was hear from the people who support him or her. I think there's a tremendous value in hearing from those individuals who say, you did this wrong, or I disagree with what you did here, because I do think you learn something and you're able to take a lot away from those experiences.
So you don't take it personal?
No, I don't take it personally. I mean, and actually over the 6 years in the House and the couple months in the Senate, I don't think I've had any instances actually where it really got into a personal thing. 99.999% of the time, it's an honest policy disagreement, And it's one of the really unique things about this particular district. I mean, the country as a whole, as well as this particular district, is a district with a lot of different viewpoints and a lot of different philosophies about government and taxes and things like that. And that's what I think makes our area so special, that you do have so many different viewpoints and so many different perspectives on how to handle different issues, and that's what I think is very very special about the 37th Senate District.
Redistricting, Matt, how does it happen, and can it be more fair?
Yeah, it happens in a way, number one, yes, it can be much more fair and much more equitable and much more open. The way it works is that basically the 4 legislative leaders get together and appoint a 5th member, and those individuals, whoever happens to be in the majority at the time, and in the time that the last redistricting was done, the Republicans had the House and the Senate and the governor's mansion. And the problem with the way we do redistricting right now is that whoever is in control of the legislature really drives redistricting. And it's a bipartisan problem. When the Democrats were in control, they did it. When the Republicans were in control, they did it. And it really doesn't lead to an equitable system. It leads to districts that are drawn in such a way to benefit whatever party has control at that particular time. And not only that, but the process by which the maps are drawn is also very problematic. It's done behind closed doors. Very little access by the public to what's been going on. You can get access to the documents because of the open records law after the fact, but the ongoing debate is really not something that the public in many ways is a part of. And I think that's one of the reasons, as you know, the Supreme Court rejected the initial map that was passed this year, or last year, because they viewed it as an overly partisan map, and it was very unfortunate that happened. I think there is a much better way to do it. I'm actually a co-sponsor of a bill that would create a bipartisan, actually a nonpartisan commission to do the redistricting, and really look at nothing more than the distribution of the population, which is what the founders originally had as their intent for redistricting. They wanted to, every 10 years, do the census and then recognize where population changes occurred, where there might be a need for less representation, where there might be a need for more representation. All of those things were part of the original idea. And unfortunately, what it's become is the party in control who has the levers of power just gerrymanders the districts in a way that benefits that party. And that's why I think we really need to look at redistricting reform as one of the big things moving forward. Redistricting reform, campaign finance reform, I think are things that would fundamentally change the way that we run elections and the way that we have representatives elected, both in the State House and in Washington, D.C., in a much more equitable way. And I think what that does is, when you have districts, for instance, and this is the result of the redistricting process we have right now, when you have districts that are 80 to 90% Republican or 80 to 90% Democratic, what happens in those districts is they tend to be, the elected officials in those districts tend to be very partisan. So they're only worried about a primary election challenge. So they sort of move to the right or they move to the far left. And I think when you have districts, and this would happen if we had redistricting reform, when you had if you had districts like ours, for instance, which is pretty close to a 50-50 split, I think that in and of itself encourages representatives and senators to work across the aisle, work with Democrats if they're a Republican, work with Republicans if they're a Democrat, and try to find solutions rather than just scoring the political points we talked about earlier if those districts are 80 to 90% of one party. And that's one of the real fundamental changes I think we need to make in order to make our elections better, to make the process work better once those elections are done.
Seems like a pretty common sense kind of a fix, but yet politics gets in the way, and that's just reality, right?
Yeah, and I think that, it's one of those examples, again, where you do have bipartisan consensus from rank and file members to change the way that we draw districts. Republicans support it, Democrats support it. One of the big problems, again, in the legislature in terms of getting it done is driven by the leadership, and there's a hesitancy, I think. My experience from the House last year, there was a hesitance from the House Republican leadership to actually moving this legislation, and it is something that is agreed in many ways upon by the rank and file members of the House and the Senate.
Yeah. And so where can somebody go for that? I mean, you talked about the League of Women Voters before, but yet there are some good government reform groups out there, right?
Yeah,
Would that be somewhere they could go to help to push, just even though this is not something that a lot of people hear about, redistricting, because it's not affecting their pocketbook. But the fact of the matter is, it could really make, I'm thinking, a better, more functional legislature.
Yeah, I think Common Cause is one of those groups that has been very active in reforming the structure of, as I said, both from a redistricting standpoint, as well as downsizing the legislature. I mean, they've been really at the forefront. They've also been at the forefront of campaign finance reform, which is we are in dire need of here in Pennsylvania.
Where are we with that, and what's the problems, and what can be the solution? Yeah,
I think campaign finance reform, when you talk about it now, the amount of money involved in state legislative and state senate races is really astronomical. And one of the ways I think we can change that is by limiting the amount of money that flows into campaigns. And what I would think is a great proposal that I'm a supporter of, as well as many Democrats and many Republicans support, is a limit on the donations from political action committees to candidates. That's one of the things we can do. We can limit that. The bill that I'm a supporter of limits it to about $4,000 per election cycle, and limit the amount that individuals can donate to a campaign as well. And I think what that would do is you take a lot of the money out of the political system, and you take it out of these campaigns, and I think sort of open it up a lot more. I've always said, the best campaign is a campaign where both candidates are out there talking directly to the public, whether it's at a forum or a debate or a town hall meeting, where there's an open engagement with members of the public, as opposed to what campaigns are now, which is frequently just the 30-second television ad that everyone sees every 2 years or every year from Labor Day through the election. And I think at the end of the day, I think this particularly happened last year, where there was so much money involved. And what for instance, the United States Supreme Court opinion in Citizens United allowed was all of the money flowing in unregulated to third parties. So the public last year saw not only the candidates running ads, but they also saw literally hundreds of millions of dollars in third-party groups coming in and running ads. So, as everyone I think would attest, from basically Labor Day last year through the election, you turn on the news, you turn on a program, it was literally nonstop political ads. And I think that the public gets frustrated by that. I think in many ways candidates are frustrated by it, because that has really become the primary means of communication. And I think that over the long run is a detrimental force to elections and to democracy, where all we're doing now is the 30-second television. And I think we've got to go back to the system where you have the hour and a half, 2-hour debates with the candidates, with people allowed to ask questions. That happens far too infrequently in this day and age because of the over-reliance on the 30-second television ad.
Well, I had a chance to talk to ex-President Clinton when I went to vote one day, I went out for a run, and I come back to Lincoln Elementary in Mount Lebanon, and there's President Clinton, and I had about 6 or 7 minutes with him, and I was asking him about the influence of money in politics. So I think that it's just so important, because I think the public just gets so tired of these attack ads from the last several months of the election, and you just sit there and you just glaze over it, and what are we really learning other than who has the most money to put money on TV? So it's tough. It's tough, and there's a lot of good things that can happen. Now, so, piggybacking on to that, political courage. Abraham Lincoln, the movie's out now, and it just shows how difficult a road he had to abolish slavery. Harry Truman, desegregating the military, he really energized the civil rights movement. And these were and he grew up in a racist household, and these are things that were tough to do, that people were telling them this is bad for your political career to try to do these things. So where can you say your political courage was shown in your career?
I think it's really, early on in the legislature, as you said, we had a lot of issues with, pushing a lot of the reform issues. And then when you heard, a lot of the stuff that happened with Bonusgate and the Attorney General investigating the legislature, and there was a lot that went on there that really, I think, disturbed a lot of the freshmen. So I think one of the thing that I would point to is that very early on in my political career, as I said, in Harrisburg, the leadership is very controlling, and they push a lot. They control the agenda. They control your ability to be able to introduce legislation, to do things. They control pretty much, particularly early on in our careers, in my freshman class member's career and my career, they control a lot of that. So one of the things I think I did early on was I really went after our own leadership. I think it great, personal expense and sort of issues that came up, but I think I thought it was important to do, and I was actually the first freshman of my class to call for the resignation of our leader at the time, Representative DeWeese, because I thought it was the right thing to do, and it was not an easy thing to do because he basically controlled everything. But I thought it was the right approach. I thought it was something that was necessary, to move the ball forward, to try and develop a clean slate when it relates to Harrisburg, and that was. At the time in particular, sort of in hindsight, it looks differently. But at the time, Representative DeWeese was, the person in charge of the legislature. So as a freshman, it was a difficult, I think, thing to do. Not a difficult decision so much, but a difficult thing to do, to challenge someone who had such institutional power and really say, enough is enough. We need to turn the page. We need to start fresh. So that that's the thing I've always pointed to as a very difficult action to take, if you will, and something that sort of put my support in jeopardy, put my ability to move legislation in jeopardy. It really put a lot of that at risk.
Well, Senator, I've been doing this for 17 years, and I've had a lot of legislators on the show, particularly running for office, and I have to tell you, I'm going to add to that, and I'm going to have to tell you that I very rarely hear someone in your position speak so much about government reform and all the really good things that could enhance and make our government more functional and better for the people. I don't hear a lot of people coming in talking about these things and being part of these things, so it's very refreshing for me to hear you say that,
and
it's a compliment to you.
Thank you.
Now, switching gears, Penn State University. Penn State University, one of the, Pennsylvania has some really, really fine universities. We all can agree with that. Penn State being one of them, in the middle of the state. It's taken some hits, with we all know what it is, and this was a few people that did some things that just were bad for kids and protecting kids. So we hear all about that, but you know, I go up there, my kids go up there, and this past weekend, their Thon, which is the dance marathon that's been going on for 30-some years, these students, just students only, raised over $12 million for pediatric cancer. And aggregately, they've raised over $100 million. In the last 5 or 6 years has been 50 of that $100 million. So they're doing some incredible things, but yet we don't hear about that because we hear all about the salacious stories.
Yeah, I think it's a tremendous testament to the kids who attend Penn State, what they were able to do with Thon, the money they were able to raise, the awareness they were able to bring to pediatric cancer. I mean, it's a real, really tremendous thing that we have so many young adults who put in the time, not only this weekend, but the organization of something that large. Is not something you sort of pull together in a couple days, a couple weeks, couple months. I mean, that's really, you know, a multi-year long process, and they've really built that event up to the point at which it's so impressive now. The money raised, you know, is off the charts, and it continues to grow. I mean, it's one of those things where you could sort of, you know, see it growing every year, and who knows what they're going to be able to do in the future for that, you know, great initiative that they're taking part of. And I do think, you know, it's important for us to not lose sight of the fact that there are a lot of tremendous things going on at Penn State, whether it's Thon, whether it's you know, the research and development that occurs at Penn State, and I think that we've got to make sure you know, that you certainly focus on taking any corrective measures that are necessary to you know, prevent you know, such a horrible tragedy from happening again, but at the same time recognizing that there are so many great things, there's so many great parts of that university that we all can take great pride in as Pennsylvania residents, and certainly from the state end, I think it's necessary, you know, on the higher education funding side to make sure that we continue to make the investments that we know pay off at Pitt and Penn State and other state schools.
You know, Matt, another thing that this state is known for, and I'm not sure everybody knows this, is some of the hospitals and some of the medical research and some of the medical technology that's going on. In Pittsburgh in particular, it's one of the transplant centers of the world. And you know, there's pioneers like Dr. Thomas Starzl, who was the liver transplant pioneer, and all these doing some incredible things. There's 117,000 people on the organ transplant waiting list nationwide. 19 people die every day because of a shortage of organs. The state of Pennsylvania is in the middle of organ. About 45% of the residents in Pennsylvania are signed up to be organ donors. And, you know, that's better than West Virginia, which is, the last I read was somewhere in the 29-30% range. Texas down in 5% range. So we're in the middle. We're in the middle. So we're not the best, we're not the worst. But yet, more can be done. And there's thousands of people every year that die. And we, in Pennsylvania, I think have you can check the box and add $1 to your registration. And I think that has raised the numbers in Pennsylvania by some of the funding and some of the education that goes on. There's two things I want to ask you about. And I just read this. I'm kind of surprised to see some of the states are doing this. I didn't think some were. In the state of New York, they had a bill to vote on. If you want to be an organ donor in this country, you have to voluntarily opt in. In the state of New York, they brought a bill to vote on it's called opt out, meaning that if you do not opt out, you're going to be an organ donor. Well, it did not pass. Maryland's now bringing it up, New Jersey, Virginia, they're bringing this issue up. Do you think the state of Pennsylvania would be open to something like this?
Sure. I think it's certainly something that we need to examine. I think that, you know, given where we are, particularly in western Pennsylvania, but even in the Southeast as well, with some of the leading institutions from an organ transplant standpoint. Thomas Jefferson in Philadelphia, UPMC here with Dr. Starzo and all the great work that they're doing at Pitt and UPMC on the issue. I think we've got to make sure that we're doing in Pennsylvania whatever we can to make that 45% number increase, whether it's a incremental increase or whether it's an increase that we can bring in through the opt-out issue, an increase we can bring in immediately. And so I think it's certainly worth examining. I think that Pennsylvania is probably, given our medical institutions, a pretty good case where an issue like that can be brought up and brought to the forefront. So I appreciate you bringing it up with me. We'll certainly take a look at it because I think it is something important. Obviously, not only from a health standpoint, a vital issue, from an economic development standpoint. When you talk about the research institutions that we have here in the Commonwealth, I think it's a tremendously important issue.
The other one other thing I want to mention about this. The other idea that I think might be tenable, short of the opt-out, is to add one question to the driver's license procedure. When you go into the driver's centers now, they ask you a question, do you want to be an organ donor, yes or no? And just that fact alone raised the rates of organ donors. And then the education from that dollar fund, that helped also. But I think another thing that could help, and I'm curious as to your thoughts, is right before you ask the question, do you want to be an organ donor, yes or no? The question can be posed, in the event you needed a life-saving transplant, would you accept it? And the reason I think that question's important is because I think when you really examine this issue, and most people are going to take the transplant, the heart transplant, the liver, or the kidney, in the event that their life is in jeopardy or their family's life's in jeopardy. Most of us, I'd say high 90%, are going to take that. Yet, we have 45% that are actually signing up to be a donor. So do you think, short of opt-out, that might be something that could be talked about, adding that question?
Sure. I think that we need to put all options on the table to increase awareness, to, as I said, increase that 45% number. I think a question like that on the driver's license exam or on the driver's license application is certainly something we should take a look at, throwing in the opt-out question as well, and certainly do whatever we can to increase awareness and increase that percentage of donors.
Well, Matt, this hour just flew by, and I want to thank you for coming in and sharing some of your views and having our people get a chance to see what you're doing out there and learn more about you, as opposed to these 30-second ads that right before the elections. They have a chance to come in and really listen to what you're doing and the types of things that you represent. So thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I really appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.
And I hope you enjoyed learning about some of the issues we talked about and learning more about Senator Matt Smith. We will put on our telecast where you can contact his offices all throughout the region. I also want to thank you for watching. Please join us for another edition of The Lee Adams Show. Best wishes to you.